All aboard for the next episode of Painting and Travel as Roger and Sarah Bansemer visit the Kentucky Railway Museum. While Roger captures one of the museum's many locomotives in paint, Sarah will be your conductor for a personal tour of the many exhibits.
Kentucky has proven to be a very beautiful state. Sarah and I have enjoyed traveling around here for the last few days. Yesterday we spent some time at the birthplace of Abraham Lincoln and also a place where he lived for a while. And today we're at this beautiful locomotive. Pretty old, but it's got a lot of character. Sarah's going to tell you a little bit more about where we are in just a few minutes. But I've set up my easel here. I'll tell you what paints I'm going to use and the materials, and then I'll get started. Today I'm using titanium white, ultramarine blue, Indian yellow, alizarin crimson, black, burnt sienna, and burnt umber. They sort of drip down onto each other, but that's okay. I also bring with me always a little atomizer. This keeps my paints wet and keeps my board wet a little bit too. I have freehanded this drawing in pencil just a few minutes ago, and I took some fixative and sprayed it so when I start to paint it won't smear. I have a few more things to set up here, and while I do that, Sarah's going to give you a tour of this area.
In addition to the large number of engines and rolling stock, train excursions are offered at the Kentucky Railroad Museum during the year, pulled by either steam or diesel engines. Much of this is due to the dedicated group of volunteers who contribute countless hours to the museum. This is Lynn Dawson. She's the marketing director for the Kentucky Railway Museum. What can you tell me about this interesting bicycle?
Well, this was actually, this is the late 1800s. This is how track inspectors would go down the track inspecting the track.
Just behind it, it looks like those were also for track inspection?
They were. This is a rail car, and this would typically take two people. It almost looks like a seesaw, except you would take this handle, and it would take, each of you would take turns to move that down the rail.
I also noticed a huge lantern in the corner.
It's actually a headlight on the front of a steam engine. Steam engines typically 1900s. We actually own one steam engine here that was built in 1905. It's over 100 years old, obviously.
Can we get a look at that locomotive? Sure. Oh, great. Is that over in the barn?
It's in the barn. It's in the big barn, yes.
Let's go.
Okay.
Lynn has brought us over here to the train shop, and this is Willie Ward, who is in charge of so many things here, and he's going to tell us about this locomotive that's about 103 years old. Hey, Willie.
How you doing?
Great. It's so nice to be here, and I am fascinated by this. Can you tell me, how did you acquire this?
This locomotive was donated to the Railway Museum in 1954 by the Iron Railroad.
This is enormous. Yes. And what about, have some famous people been on this?
One of the first assignments for this locomotive was to pull the Teddy Roosevelt, the campaign train. That was one of her first assignments, which was pulled on this branch line here at the Railway Museum. And if I may also point out that something that's very, very unusual, to most steam engines that do operate at a museum are not operating on a home road. Because this locomotive did pull the train across this branch line, which is called the 11th branch, this locomotive is operating on her home road, which is a very just unique feature.
That is unique. So the original engine on the original branch.
Yeah. Please watch your step.
Willie, could you show me exactly how the bell operates?
Right here.
Now, I noticed over there, I think it's a trolley. Can we take a look at that?
Most definitely can.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to follow you over to the trolley.
Okay.
This looks just fascinating. How old is this and what's the history?
Well, this trolley here was built in 1886. There are only just two left in existence. The other one is located in Louisville, Kentucky at Tennyson Broadway at Union Station. And the other one is this one here.
And this is wooden, isn't it?
Yes, this is wood. And the way the motor power was done on this one was that you had the two mules that would pull it.
Two mules.
Two mules. And the passenger will enter from the rear of the car. And this little wood strip that's coming down, the passenger will drop in a nickel in the back, and it will go straight down through here, up to the driver where there's a box. And that coin will drop into that box to indicate to the driver that the passenger had paid for the fare.
So it costs 5 cents. You drop the nickel in the chute. It's like a marble track. Comes down here. Driver knows you've paid.
You just sit on down and then sit back and enjoy your ride.
Willie, thanks so much for the trolley tour. I really enjoyed it. I've never seen one like it. It's very special.
Well, we thank you. And did you come back to see us again, sir?
Love to come back. Thanks. The museum has something for everyone. Here, 3,000 square feet of model railroad exhibit space displays operating layouts in HO scale, N scale, S scale, and G gauge from different time periods. This little 30-ton yard engine would have been used to switch cars around at a small factory, and this unique steam-powered crane built in the 1920s would come to the rescue at derailments. The largest engine in the collection is the Chesapeake & Ohio number 2716, built in 1942. The engine measures 120 feet in length and weighs nearly 500,000 pounds, dwarfing everything in sight. Not exactly fuel efficient. This massive engine would burn a ton of coal every hour, along with several hundred gallons of water. I could sense the staggering power this engine could produce as I climbed on board, where a baffling display of gauges, levers, and pipes amazed me even further. Well, I can see out the window, of course, but I can't see directly in front of me as I could if I were driving a car, so I think this would be quite challenging to be the engineer. I don't know if I would have the nerves for it or not. You'd have to go on faith quite a bit, I think.
Okay, I think I have everything ready. The weather seems to be cooperating, so let me get started. I'm not going to paint that tree behind the locomotive. I think I'll start with some burnt umber and burnt sienna. I'm using acrylics today. I think I mentioned that just a few minutes ago, but using acrylics, these dry pretty quick out here in the field. Pick up some burnt umber, burnt sienna, and just going to spray my masonite board here, get it a little bit wet, and that way I can put a wash of this rusty color over my painting and still see my pencil marks through it. I'm getting a little bit of fisheye, what they call fisheye here on my painting from spraying it, which means I'm getting a few bubbles here. A couple ways to fix that. One thing to do is to put a little soap on your palette. If you mix a little tiny bit of soap with these paints, it will take care of this paint creeping. The other thing to do is just sort of scrub hard, and that will eliminate that. That's what I'm going to have to do now because I don't have any soap out here. You can see right in there where it's called fisheye. It's not covering. But I just scrub a little bit hard there, and it'll take care of that. I made my pencil drawing quite dark because I knew I was going to put this paint over this, so I didn't want to lose my pencil marks. I think I must have spent at least 20 minutes or so drawing that. I tried to keep the basic shapes on this engine, which they are, of course, but I didn't want to put in too much detail, but I wanted enough so I wouldn't have to struggle with it with my paints, that I could really see everything I needed to put in there. Just when I got my paints here, I didn't want to have to think about drawing and painting at the same time, so I put in quite a bit of drawing in this. I'll pick up a little bit of ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson, kind of give me a rusty color. I'll need to keep spraying my board all the time. It's a little bit damp out this morning, but the sun is hitting this palette. It's going to dry this paint out. Also, we got a nice breeze here, and that will dry these acrylics pretty quick. I've switched to a little bit smaller brush here. I have loved railroad trains since I was a little boy. I wanted to do a simpler subject actually, but I just couldn't resist the lure of this old rusty engine. I think before the light changes any more, I'll take my digital camera, take a few pictures of this locomotive. I'll take a few details later too, that way I'll have some reference material to finish this painting in the studio. I've established my middle tones in this painting with this burnt sienna area, and now I'm putting in all my dark tones, and I'll start with the light tones. Got a lot of beautiful rust. Well, the whole thing is rusty, but it's sort of a very beautiful reddish down in this area here. So take some alizarin crimson, Indian yellow, and I'm going to continue to put washes over this. Just thin washes of color, and build this up. As I get this darker and darker, I start to lose my drawing a little bit, so I have to be careful and remember what I have underneath there. Of course, my subject's right here too, so I can reference that. This acrylic paint is dry on here right now. One reason I'm spraying it is it just lets these other colors flow a little bit easier across this board. This is a beautiful spot we found here. We're just among all these beautiful flowers. Can't be nicer. We've got a few deliveries around this train yard that are a little bit noisy, but other than that, it's quite a good location to sit and work. This old engine belonged to the Louisville and Nashville Railway. Originally had a number of 2152 right below the window up there. And it's called the yard engine. It wasn't made to haul freight or passenger cars on the up and down the between towns. It was just made to switch cars in the yard here. It's kind of fun working with these negative areas. By negative areas, I mean these dark spaces between the light areas. Haven't used any white on this painting so far, but I think I'm about to dip into it now and start bringing out some of these highlights. There are real good highlights on it, but there are some sunlight, there are some lighter spots. I wouldn't call them highlights. It's not like looking at a shiny object where I see a lot of glare off of it. So it's pretty subtle. Alizarin crimson, Indian yellow, white. I want to put white in this paint. It will become opaque, which means if I put it on too heavily, I'll lose all this sort of interesting texture in here that I don't want to lose too much of. But I have to make it lighter, so the addition of white is necessary. These are just amazing creatures, these old steam engines. They're just so massive. Even this small steam engine here, Sarah walked beside it, you can just sense how enormous it was. These wheels originally were painted white. The outsides right here, most of that's faded away, indicate a little bit of that. I love painting things that are so functional. There's nothing on this that's decorative. This is not a fashion statement. There's something fascinating about painting something that is so functional, whether it's a barn or a train. I just like that sort of thing. Going to pick up my larger brush now and mix a few colors for this background. We have a blue sky up there. I don't want to get this too blue, but I want this to be pretty white. My paints are starting to sort of dry up here in my palette, so I'm going to take a minute and with my razor blade scrape these paints off. Got my little box, razor blade. Just remove a little bit of those. I'll probably have to give this sky a second coat, maybe even a third coat when I get in the studio. It's interesting about describing objects because the most description you'll get from this painting is not all the detail in here. It's the edge of the form that will describe what this is. I could have this all black. It could be a silhouette. And if I had a good outline here of the shape of this engine, you could tell it was an engine. But if the edge of the form is not correct, if it's not the right shape, it really throws off the thinking as to what the subject is. So the outline here is important. And of course, painting in the field is not so easy. It's much easier to finish this when I'm back in the studio. That's one real advantage we have over the old masters with our cameras today. Be able to take photographs and freeze that moment in time to use as reference later on. Actually, I'm not putting in the details, I'm painting around the details. I'm not painting the railing, I'm just painting around it. I like painting negative areas for another reason. It's because it gives the painting a painterly quality. There's a little railing back here too, so I'll just try and put in another little negative area to indicate that railing back there. Probably should pick up my small pointed brush for this. There are a lot of trees behind that engine there, which I'm ignoring. And I'm just going to paint the sky around it. Will be more of a portrait, I guess. Pick up a little black, gray this down in this area. Now for a old black steam engine, I really haven't used much black in this painting. Here's an area I really like. It's the window. Right here I can see through this cab to the other side. And I can see a sliver of that window back there. This is the post. So these are the two posts here. So I want to keep them about the same size. This one will be a little bit bigger actually because it's a little bit closer to me. I'll leave that a little larger. Now as this day goes on here, there seems to be quite a bit more activity in this train yard. But so far, we haven't had something park in front of us, so that's always a plus. My paints actually haven't dried out as much as I thought they would today. Seems like the further north we get, the paints dry out a little bit less, as opposed to being in the Cayman Islands or in Florida, where they just dry out almost instantly. Let me see, this curves over here just beautifully. I love the way that curves over. Just gives a nice sort of curve around there. And we have a number of valves and pipes up here too. It's time to pick up my little brush, and I can put in a few of these details that I couldn't with that larger brush. And I can sharpen these up a bit too, and I'm at it. Well, I've managed to define the shape of this engine pretty well. All this area in here is really nothing more than texture. There's not much detail, but as you can see, the outline of this, it's been important enough where you can tell it's a locomotive. So anything I do from here on out with the detail will just help to improve it. I'm going to try and just refine the values of this painting a little more, and maybe with a pointed brush, put in a few more details here, picking up a little bit of white here, because all this is, there's no white in any of this in here. The only place I have white are these few areas here, but I do need to start punching this up a little bit by adding some other tones. I'm going to put out one more color, and that's naphthol red, just a little bit of it. And I think when I mix that with this Indian yellow, it might make a little bit more vivid rust color for some of these areas. I'll try and vary this as I go. Maybe a little more yellow in parts of it, more red in other parts. 3 rectangular shapes right down here. I have no idea what they are, but put those in. Ultramarine blue, black. I don't use black very much, but this is a good instance. It just saves a little bit of time. I can mix up as dark a color as this black using these 3 primary colors, the ultramarine blue, Indian yellow, and the alizarin crimson. In fact, I'll show you right here. And really, when I put that on my palette, it's not going to be any different than this black here. So putting on black just saves a little bit of time and energy like this, where everything is so dark in this painting. I wouldn't have wanted to start out using black. Remember, I started out using this burnt sienna, burnt umber color, maybe with a little bit of ultramarine blue. So it's far from black. Continuing to put on these washes to get the values where I want them. I'll take a little of this Indian yellow. It's drying up pretty good on me now. So some white. Maybe I'm going to keep those railings a little bit, just a touch of color. And there's one over here. Put a highlight on that. And this one here, over here is yellow too. Got some great rivets on this old monster. Let me put some of those in here. Got a lot of pipes up there too. I'm going to indicate those. Now I don't want all those the same color or the same value. Need to change that, so I'll make that a little darker. A little bit of blue, maybe a little bit of brown in there. These will be darker as they go down because this is round, so be a little bit lighter up here and a little bit darker down here. It's a nice little white band around that coal car. It's not white anymore, but make it a little bit gray. I'm not worried about getting these lines real straight. They're not, if they're too straight, too perfect, it looks too much like a mechanical drawing. I want to stay away from that. I don't think I have a problem. I think this old iron horse needs its number back. 2152. It's interesting because the railroad caboose I used to own, I had the number 2352 on it. So what a strange coincidence with these numbers. I'll lighten up a few parts of this. Now the sun's coming out. At least some of the activity in the yard here is gone away, so we don't have quite so much ambient noise in the background. But painting on location is just like that. Run into all sorts of obstacles while we're painting. If it's not the light or the weather, it's some loud noise. We've been pretty lucky today. As this light changes, I can see more and more rivets and details as the light moves over it. Got lots of little bumblebees flying around on these flowers. They're not bothering me, but it's quite nice actually. There's lots of pipes in here. I have no idea where they all go. Well, as usual, Sarah and I have found another great spot, and we've enjoyed so much being here at the Kentucky Railway Museum in New Haven, Kentucky. I'm going to finish this painting in the studio. I'll put a few more details on it, but I don't want to lose all those textures, so I'll go carefully. But once I do that, I'll sign it, put some varnish on it, and we'll put a frame on it, and we'll see what it looks like. Well, back in the studio, I just wanted to recap a little bit more as to what I did to finish this painting. First off, I started to put a little bit of blue color in this cab engine here. Just a little bit of maybe some light bouncing in from the sky. Also pushed it back a little bit gave it a little bit of distance. Out in the field, I had trouble getting these really nice and round, and I put in a few more of these interesting pipes that were all over this engine. I went over the entire background. I repainted it because it just didn't cover quite well enough. So I took my cerulean blue and white, maybe a little bit of yellow ochre to make it a good solid color. And I wanted it a nice solid color because I didn't want it to conflict with all the textures within this painting of the engine. This is very subtle, but right behind the numbers on the cab, 2152, I made that a little bit bluer. It's very gray, kind of subtle here, but it just brought it out just enough to accentuate these numbers. Of course, there's a lot of rocks underneath the railroad track itself, so I added some texture right underneath the railroad tracks. Very little sliver there of it, but we added some texture right down in this area to represent the roadbed. This painting will be a nice memory for Sarah and me of the Kentucky Railway Museum. So now let's take a little bit closer look, put the frame on it, and then we'll move on to the next one.
This is Lynn Dawson. She's the marketing director. This is Lynn Dawson.
We can put that in our play first.
For more information about painting and travel with Roger and Sarah Bansemer, visit paintingandtravel.com.